I think a good way to sum up what I'm about to sort of dive into is mourn the past while moving forward and creating a better future. And a lot of times we say that we have to learn from the past. And I think if we're going to use that notion of learning from the past, what are we looking to achieve from that? And I think what we should be looking to achieve from learning from the past is how can I make myself more available to the things that I want right now? I've touched on this in a different video, but a lot of times what happens is we hold a lot of sadness for the past because we are mourning it as if the very things and the emotions, that positive emotions that we felt in the past, are now gone forever. A lot of times we attach certain feelings when we've only experienced them once or twice. We attach them to certain situations, environments, and people rather than understanding it wasn't those environments, it wasn't those situations, it wasn't that person that necessarily is the cause of you feeling those positive emotions, but rather they triggered your ability to feel those positive emotions. So you can feel those beautiful, amazing emotions again. It just may look different this time. And let me give an example. When you're a kid and you have your first crush or your first friend or your first accomplishment, whatever it is, you feel very sort of surrendered to that emotion because you've never experienced anything like it before. So you're just taking it all in, you're just allowing it. And then equally so, when that friend betrays you or that crush breaks your heart or that accomplishment is actually, you got second place instead of first place, whatever it is, we attach ourselves so deeply to the external stimuli instead of realizing that within ourselves there is always the capability of feeling those positive emotions. It's just that the outside world does a good job of triggering those positive emotions within us. Because think about it, no matter what someone does, they can't make you feel anything. All they can do is act in a certain way, and how we feel is our experience. We're the ones creating the feeling. When we feel happy, even if we're happy about something, it is our nervous system that is creating the sensation of happiness. It is our nervous system that is creating the feeling of sadness, anger, excitement, whatever it may be. So, wouldn't it make more sense to realize that we are always capable of feeling those feelings? And I think this is where it starts to get a little bit tricky because a lot of times when people are getting into psychology and spirituality, they now start to completely close themselves off from the outside world to give them any sort of emotional fulfillment. And this is, I guess, more of a Eastern philosophy, whereas, you're only looking to yourself and you're trying to create all the emotions that you desire from another or from the outside world. You try to create that within yourself. And yes, that is possible, but it's not ultimately completely necessary. And I think there is a balancing act that we can do in which we are allowing ourselves to experience the outside world because it does exist for a reason, does it not? And we're allowing ourselves to experience those emotions, but we're not attaching those emotions too heavily on that person or on that situation or on that environment. We're still realizing that we are the ones creating this emotion and that it's just other people or outside factors that are triggering us into feeling that emotion. So, how does this tie into the past? It ties into the past because you're creating a framework in your mind that if you're constantly sad about the past, you're telling your unconscious that you missed out on something that is no longer available to you. But this isn't true. You can feel those same feelings again, whether it's romantic, whether it's platonic, whether it's an accomplished feeling, whether it's a free feeling, whatever it is, you can feel those emotions again because there's so much opportunity and there's so much vastness that exists in reality. And in this world, there is so much vastness. There are so many people. There are so many environments and situations. So it would be very remiss to, I guess, investigate our sadness from a point of view of what did we do wrong instead of just observing our sadness as something that is part of the human process. That's why I say mourn while moving forward, because it's not about solving the sadness. You can't solve sadness. Whenever anyone comes to me or messages me about sadness or any deep sort of mourning that needs to be done from something that has occurred in the past, What advice can you truly give except feel it so deeply to the point where you have felt the depths of the ocean of your sadness, so there's nothing unfamiliar left to feel? And when there's nothing unfamiliar left, it is then where we can exist side by side with that feeling and move forward in our lives. We can still mourn the past. We can still feel sadness for the past, but all the while we are also not neglecting what lies ahead of us in the future and the opportunities and blessings that may lie ahead on our path. So be very careful to not confuse observance with analysis, because you can analyze maybe why you feel triggered by something. But if you're laying in your bed and maybe you're moving to a new chapter of your life, or you're moving into a new sort of, you know, area, or a new foundation, or a new phase, whatever it may be, and you find yourself teary-eyed thinking about the past, don't beat yourself up over it, but also don't sulk in it. Don't go too far on either end of the spectrum. Understand this one thing very deeply. That emotional sort of distress, that sadness that you're feeling, it's not for no reason. And you're allowed to feel sad for the past. You're allowed to feel sad that certain people are not readily available to you anymore. You're allowed to feel sad that the environment that you found so much comfort in the past is where you are no longer situated. But we must also acknowledge that what lies ahead may provide those same feelings, if not even greater. You may find home in unfamiliar environments that you would have never guessed. You might find utter and complete happiness in sharing moments with people you would have never known, if not for, I don't know, maybe stepping out of your comfort zone and not allowing that sadness to bring you down. So mourn while moving forward, I think, is a good mantra, and we oftentimes believe that because we feel one emotion, we can't feel another. And sadness has a way of making you feel guilty for being excited about the future. Two things can exist at the same time. And that, my friends, is emotional intelligence. Because you understand that emotions don't define you. And that when things are complex, when things are difficult to understand, it's because they're not really meant to be understood. They're not really meant to be analyzed. They're meant to be felt. Sadness needs to be felt. There are many people, I think, that go about their life trying to assume a positive mindset, and that is amazing. We all should strive to have a positive mindset. But when that inherent sadness that is part of the emotional experience comes up, you can't shove it down, because that's when things get really, really tricky. You can't shove it under the surface and try to, withhold those tears and act like you're not sad about this new phase that you're entering, and sad about the past, sad about all those times that you enjoyed, maybe in your childhood or when you were younger, whatever it was. All those times are truly gone. Two things can be true. Firstly, we can acknowledge that we do miss the past, and that those events not being able to happen again with those same people in those same environments, that does make us sad. Equally, we can understand that nothing has changed in our ability to feel amazing and enjoyable emotions. Nothing has changed in our ability to experience happiness, to experience childlike joy. Childlike joy is not reserved for children. It's an emotional state. And it's what happens when we surrender to that childlike state of being, rather than holding on so tight into not feeling certain emotions. There's a stark contrast between the control that you have over acting upon emotions versus trying to control the raw, energetic emotions themselves. There's a very big difference between the two. In the first situation, yes, I mean, that is awareness. We don't let our emotions always dictate how we're going to move throughout life. If we're always waiting to feel a certain way, we're just going to be stuck in the same cycle, repeating the same experiences. You don't wait to feel motivated before starting that thing. You don't wait to feel ready before leaving your comfort zone. So that's one aspect. But in another aspect, you can't control how much sadness you feel. You can't control how much anger something makes you feel. But of course, you can control how you respond to these emotions. And something really interesting happens with emotions. And it's almost counterintuitive because we want to be over with it so quick. We want it to be over with, just, whatever. I'll feel it for a couple minutes and then let's get back in the groove of things and let's not ruminate too much on this. But what happens is when you get a little bit comfortable in the emotions and you kind of tell yourself, I'm not going anywhere. I've allowed the space and I'm giving the time and I'm respecting the emotions that come through. I'm not going to act on them. After this hour is up, after I scroll through old photos and give a little cry, you know, I'm not going to allow that to dictate the way I go about my life because I have to remain somewhat stoic and somewhat logical so that I'm not constantly influenced by the tides of emotions. But you're allowing it, and you're allowing it deeply, and you're not rushing it to be on its way out. And in this counterintuitive awareness sort of manner, emotions gently start to make their way out because there's no longer the wall of fear that is surrounding feeling that emotion. That's one thing you can never do is create a narrative that you aren't capable of feeling whatever emotions lie deep within your unconscious or subconscious, however you want to phrase it. That's something you can never do because you're showing your mind then that there is a disconnect between your conscious awareness and your nervous system. And there isn't. Your nervous system is looking to you for leadership and for conscious direction. And again, how does this tie in to making peace with the past and moving forward to the future? It's because when we look at our life right now, if there are parts of our life that are unsatisfied, and this is going to be the brutal, honest truth, this isn't the spiritual answer, this isn't the very serious psychoanalytical answer, this is the practical, kind of real answer that I found is when we are unsatisfied with certain areas of our life, we tend to look back in the past when those certain areas were fulfilled. And the answer then is not to go back into that. We don't learn from the past in that manner, but we learn rather about what we're not doing now. So I'm going to repeat that. We don't learn from what we did in the past to accomplish those things necessarily, but rather we learn from what we're doing to close ourselves off to having those areas of our life fulfilled right now. Whether it's not leaving our comfort zone, whether it's not stepping out of our shell, overcoming fear, facing our anxiety, whatever it may be, it is far more likely that we are closing ourselves off to the things that we want instead of repelling them. It's usually us getting in our own way, and it's only fair to see things extremely practically before trying to dive into them psychoanalytically. Don't be too quick to dismiss the past as a vehicle for learning lessons, but also don't be too quick to think that you need to somehow go back to who you were before because you're never going to be able to go back to that identity. You've evolved, you've grown, you've matured. What we're trying to do now is create something within ourselves emotionally that replicates those feelings. And to replicate those feelings, we don't have to replicate being that same person or being with those same people or being in that same environment and situations. We don't have to replicate that aspect of it. Rather, we have to replicate our ability to staying open into finding those things in new environments, in new people, in new situations. Does that make sense? Because when you're looking at your phone, when you're looking at old photos, when you're looking at old videos, you will be sad that that person isn't in your life anymore. You will be sad that that environment doesn't exist. And I think this is something that hits for many of us is, you know, when you're younger, much younger, I'm talking, things felt so easy. You never really realized how good things were. And don't beat yourself up over not realizing how good things were. Every single kid, every single young person ever never knows how good it is until it really is. And probably there's a even older version of you right now who is looking back and saying, how good it was right now. We always do that. It's the human condition. And the only way to stop this sort of destructive cycle is to be brutally honest with ourselves. What are we not satisfied with? What are we looking into the past for to fill the gaps of what we're lacking now? And then if it doesn't exist in that paradigm, then we can truly come at it from an aspect of a authentic healing perspective. Because if it doesn't fall into that category, if it's something that, we know is gone, if it's something that we know isn't coming back, then there's no solving to be done. There's no solving. There's just allowing. There's just accepting, making peace with. And take your time. Don't rush. Don't rush. Because in feeling those difficult emotions and feeling that sadness, you will find yourself as well. You will find yourself reborn. You will find yourself significantly more capable of being able to regulate your emotions after experiencing whatever it is that is making itself known to you now. It doesn't have to be a really big thing either. Something very small can upset us, and that's okay as well. Regulating ourselves and our emotions and our nervous system, it's not about, making do with tragedy. It's not about making do with the really big things that we have to mourn, though it can be. It is really about those small instances when you're feeling like you just want to retreat back into the past. And it's not about shutting down that feeling. You're allowed to feel like retreating back into the past. It's about being your own sort of guide in saying, no, the past is gone, but the future ahead is heaven. And I know that's a little too metaphorical, but I think it paints a good picture for us. Because if the future ahead was something so amazing that you could have never, ever dreamt for yourself, you wouldn't be so hung up. You wouldn't feel so threatened. Because that's what it is, right? We feel the threat of what we experienced in the past is going to be the best that there ever was. But that is our choice. That is our decision to make. Are we going to allow it to be the best it ever was? And sort of ironically, it will be the best that it ever was if we keep giving it the power to exist in that manner. If we accept that the best has already happened, we will live a self-fulfilling prophecy. Nothing inherently has changed in your ability to feel really positive and enjoyable and beautiful emotions. You are still capable, no matter what age, no matter what circumstance. You are capable of creating those experiences within you because it is you that is triggering that emotional experience. Hypothetically, you could sit in your room with your eyes closed and trigger yourself into feeling utter happiness and bliss. I'm not saying that is the answer, but I'm saying if we can acknowledge that that does exist, and as well, we can find that same thing in new environments, in new situations, and in new people, then we feel much more optimistic about the future because we start to see that all we have to do is deal with ourselves. That's all we have to do. If there's a fear, if there's an anxiety in the way, if there's something shutting us off, there's nothing more that we have to do than open ourselves up into feeling those things again, putting ourselves out there, leaving our comfort zone, facing those fears and anxieties, letting go of that trauma, understanding that nostalgia is okay to feel, but we cannot let it define us. Because what lies ahead is certainly greater, but we have to be open enough and we have to be sort of in tune enough to walk that path. The path isn't going to walk itself after all, and the path never ever goes backwards. So though you're allowed to look in the past, don't see the past as a current classroom. It's a teacher that is also gone. Its lessons are also gone. Anything you're learning from the past is meant to be applied right now. Just because that one person made you feel something doesn't mean that you have to go call them. And that's a metaphor for all circumstances and all situations in life. Just because the past made you feel a certain way doesn't mean it's the only thing that can make you feel that way. That's it for today's video, guys. Thank you for listening. I'm going to link my book in the description if you want to read more about all these sorts of ideas and whatever else. But other than that, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, thank you as always. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.